Welcome back. Now, stocks may top the headlines and bankruptcies at publicly traded companies. They are on the rise, but that is only part of the economic story because the economy is largely built on private companies. Here to help us figure out the health of that economy is Brian Hamilton. He is the CEO of SageWorks, and his company tracks private company data. Brian, welcome to the program.
Great to be here.
It's refreshing in a way to really talk about this other economy because, as we were just discussing during the break, you have anywhere from 8 to perhaps 10,000 publicly traded companies, people that have already gone public, but the bulk of the economy, to a certain extent, and in specific industry groups, is private. What's the outlook right now?
Yeah, usually private. And don't forget, Pim, there's 27 million of them. And that's not an idle statistic. The outlook, very interesting. In some ways, it tracks to public company stuff. But there's some stability in net profit margins for privately held companies. That's really important. These companies, as you mentioned, have to meet payroll, so they can't go below zero. If they go below zero, they're out of business. But generally, the profit margins, the gross margins are holding steady. Sales are declining a bit, no doubt. Net profit dollars are declining. But there's a bit of a stability to that sector that you don't see in the markets.
What should investors in publicly traded companies take away from what information you've been able to gather about the health and the sort of vitality of the various industry groups that you look at in the private sector?
Yeah. Great point. Well, let's be realistic as well. If you look at privately held company data, you can see that there's a lot of problems in the construction industry. Any industries associated with that sector is sucking wind, just like in the publicly traded arena. No doubt about it. Retail is alive, but not super well. So in a way, there's similarities. But again, sales trends, although they're down, are not as profound in the public sector market.
What about, are there any healthy signs in the private sector at the moment?
Yeah, wow, an interesting one. And it hasn't gotten a ton of coverage. Very interesting coming into a new administration. Non-residential building in that sector is actually growing. A lot of people don't realize that. Sales are going up, I think, about 3.5% last year.
Non-residential building is positive.
Yeah, really important to note that, right? Because in the new administration, there's a big push to do a lot of infrastructure development. But if you look at that sector, it's actually growing and it's profitable. So highway construction, building construction associated with infrastructure is growing. And in the new administration, there's going to be a big push to sort of bolster that even more. But that's definitely notable.
What about some of the, perhaps what you might consider the stalwart industries, whether it is dry cleaning or whether it's a florist or things like that? What is your data showing, let's say, about the dry cleaning business? I mean, is that turning out to be, as many people had hoped, a stable business to be in?
Pretty stable, pretty stable. There's not a lot of decline. As you can imagine, those smaller entrepreneurial companies tend to be adaptive. So if the economy is moving against them, they can be very responsive. They can adjust a little more quickly. And by the way, if you look at our general index at SageWorks, the net profit margins are going up for all privately held companies. So it's very interesting, isn't it? They're adapting to lower sales volume by cutting expenses and really trying to meet consumer needs.
I noticed in some of your reports you looked at what goes on in the insurance carriers business. What's going on in the insurance business right now?
In the insurance business, they're having some difficulty, no doubt about it. I mean, the big industries where there's challenges are kind of obvious. I mean, there's a lot of media coverage on it. Real estate,
and so on.
Financials. Obviously, the automaker industry is having problems. That's notable too because there's a lot of small suppliers that provide services to the big four, the big three, to Detroit. And there's been sales declines in that sector as well.
But I was noting, I guess, when I talked about insurance, I meant the insurance carriers, that in a time when people are perhaps retrenching, shifting some of their investment options, looking more at insurance. In fact, the numbers actually was a 1% growth rate.
That's correct, yeah. Which is not terrific. It's stable, but you're right. There's a lot of stability, and it tends to, that sector tends to stay even in declines.
What are you seeing in terms of the service industry in general? I mean, things like accounting, the legal professions. Is that getting hit as well?
No, that's a boom industry. It's very interesting. Everyone is going to they're going to community bankers. There's a lot of money movement from the big institutions to the community banking industry, and people are using their accountants more. which is interesting. So those industries are actually growing.
Have you noticed, last question, have you noticed in this trend going to the community bankers, is there any reason that they're citing what areas of the community banking industry is getting the most lift?
There's about 8,000 financial institutions in the country. Of course, a large composition of the asset base is in the really huge institutions. But there's anxiety probably in the general market around big institutions, and they're moving their assets to community banks. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you very much, Brian Hamilton, CEO of SageWorks. Appreciate your information on the private economy.